Hello everyone, welcome back to the workshop. So in this quick video, I want to talk about the anatomy of a good scroll jig and how you can make one. So what makes up a great scroll jig? Well, first and primary is it needs to fit your purpose. So you need to make the scroll jig to actually fit your purpose. So it doesn't help if you've got a gigantic scroll jig and you only need to make small little tiny scrolls. Likewise, it doesn't help if you have a tiny little scroll jig, it's not going to make gigantic scrolls for you. So they are purpose built for the job, and in general, you can get away with a general size jig like this to do multiple size scrolls around this one piece. We'll get to that in a second. So that's the first important anatomy of a scroll jig. It's got to fit your project very well. The second important part, and this is probably the primary important part, is the scroll jig has got to be a good scroll. So if you don't know how to make a good scroll to begin with, you need to practice that before you make your first jig. Because however wonky you make this scroll, that's how the rest of your scrolls from now on out, when you use this jig, is going to turn out. And it may actually be advantageous to you over time to improve your jigs over time. As your skills increase, these will only get better and better and say more perfect, if you will, or as close to. So the third thing that makes up an anatomy of a good scroll jig is the placement of the jig for efficiency in your shop. I find it to be super helpful to have a jig to be able to be locked in the vise versus the anvil. If you have a jig that's locked in the anvil, that takes up space on the anvil surface or top. It's fine if that's all you have, or if your vise is locked over into a corner of a shop somewhere, it's okay to take and use the anvil itself. But just be aware that you can't quickly form the end of a scroll and then come over and wrap it around a jig. Now you have to form the end of the scroll, and if you don't have enough space on your anvil top, you have to then pick up a jig, install it, and then that wastes time, and it might cause you to have to go another heat or two. So it needs to be purpose built. Again, go back to it needs to be well suited to the job. It needs to be as close to perfect as possible, so it needs to be a good scroll to begin with, and it needs to actually be set up in a way in the shop that is the most advantageous for you. So a good scroll, again, it's paramount for the anatomy of a good scroll jig is to be able to make good scrolls first. So that's your first step. That's where you want to start with, is make your good scrolls. Now, as you can see here, this has some nice scrolls on it. These are roughly, if I were to measure these scrolls, how they come out, they would probably be right around 5 to 6 inches. 5 to 6-ish inches, if you will, and that's what ended up making these. So you can see this one jig helped me make both of these ends pretty darn even. Now this will get turned into more elaborate. This is going with other scrolls for a project I'm working on, but you can see how helpful a scroll jig can be. This would not be impossible to do by hand, but when you have a bunch of these in a project to do, scroll jigs are a lifesaver. As you can see, this fits right around this nice and cleanly. It holds everything nice and perfectly. Let me loosen this jig up. I'm going to set this up to where hopefully you guys can see how that goes around it. And this is what I'm talking about. It's very important that this curvature be correct and that the jig fits to the inside of your expected scroll itself. That'll take a little bit of math for you to figure out for your own frame how far around you need to bend on the scroll in order to fit within inside the dimensions of what you're looking for. But as you can see, I've got it marked out with chalk or soapstone, if you will, about how far I need to bend this around. So I bend this around, and that's the end of the bending. It starts trailing off straight after that soapstone mark. So now I can pull right on around each and every time, no matter what side of the jig I'm on. I'll always be able to find and trail around right there at that same point. It is generally best if the scroll material, the jig material, is at least twice the thickness, for longevity purposes, at least twice the thickness of the intended scroll, max scroll thickness you plan on scrolling around it. As you can see, this here is 3/8 of an inch thick, whereas this is 1/2 of an inch thick on the side profile here. This is at the limits of what this can do without it bending around and messing up my scroll jig. So keep that in mind. You always want the jig to be thicker than the material bent around if you can when you're designing it. 1/4x1 flat goes around this all day long. It can get hot. You're not going to ruin anything. Nothing's going to get wonky and out of shape. If you do bend thicker material like this around this, you do need to make sure that this is coming out really super hot and you stop once it cools down, because this just can't take it. So there you go. That's it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. That's the anatomy, real quick, of a good scroll jig. If you guys are out there trying to make a ton of scrolls by hand, I suggest you practice them first, get a really good looking one, make up a really nice scroll jig, and then continue on with your work. And these are a real lifesaver. So that's it for today. God bless each and every last one of you. Thank you so much for watching. And thank you to all of you fine channel members out there. This channel wouldn't be possible without you. We'll catch you all on the next one.